Greetings all, welcome to another session here of Tuzi Talks. Today we're going to be continuing our discussion in Cloud and Genesee and HAmayan's text literacy instruction for English language learners. That's that text that's right over there. You can certainly download this or purchase it from Barnes & Noble or Amazon online. It's a nice little book, and today we're going to be focusing on one of their chapters, which is assessing ESL students, English language learners. And so we're going to be looking at assessment, what is assessment, and the difference between assessment that you would normally have in a classroom versus the larger assessments that are now being required, the state type of tests that are now being required from people here in the United States. Lastly, we'll look at some assessment tools, some of the less common or the less major assessment types of tools. First question that they talk about is exactly what is assessment? Now, when I'm talking to students about this or future teachers, I often try to describe assessment as a much bigger pool than just tests. Tests is going to be this smaller one in here. And so what happens is with a test, you understand that that can be an assessment tool. But there are all these other types of assessments out here that you could be using. Observations, watching someone present, watching someone do a skit, listening to some conversation, all these different ways that you can describe things outside of tests. And so here's a little definition that an assessment includes any number of observations that can be used to gauge the ability of the assessee. Observations can be based on activities performed in class. They're doing a speech or a presentation or a debate, or, they're doing a play, they're doing a skit, okay, some activity that is performed, a test that's being completed, whether it's a paper test or, it could even be a game. It could be nonverbal communication that's being transmitted. These can be formal or informal. You can just be walking around and overhear your students saying something, and that can be a form of assessment. It's just an observation. You see how they're using language. It's funny, when I teach language, I teach words like and because in other languages, they don't pronounce it that way. So those are some of the nonverbal kind, as far as non-word types. And of course, we have other ways of using expressions to mean things. I had a friend one day. He was pointing to something. He said, "Hey, can you go get me that that screwdriver?" And I'm like, "What screwdriver?" And he goes like this. He goes, "Over there." Right? Points with his lips, and I look at him. I don't say anything to him, but I notice immediately that's not a nonverbal cue in my culture. So I understood what he meant, but as I'm walking to go get this screwdriver for him, I'm chuckling inside. He was communicating, but he was not communicating with words. And so that can also be some form of thing that you can assess. So assessment is a lot larger than just a test. A lot of different ways that you can collect things. So what is assessment? It's you're observing a student activities and his performance in class. You're watching him. You're listening to him. You're seeing how he acts and reacts, and you can mark these things down. I have had teachers that have checklists. And as they hear students do things, they can mark them off. I've had teachers tell their students, "I'm going to be listening to you, and if you use this structure, or you speak this way, or you use this convention, I'm giving you extra credit." And so he would see them walk around trying to observe what's going on. Now, you don't have to do that. I mean, I think that can bring added pressure to students. But you're just observing what they're doing. You can observe planned and unplanned behavior. You can observe formal and spontaneous behavior. So formal, a speech, a presentation, a game, or spontaneous. They're just talking. And you notice that they're using language, or they're using vocabulary, or they're speaking in such a way, and you can give them, not credit. You can observe what that is and mark that off. Note that they have progressed. Okay, you can, of course, analyze a test or a quiz or some type of writing assignment. You can assess their reading and writing skills better in that way. The assessments should also impact instructional plans. And now that's one of the nice things about classroom-based assessments. The assessment is not necessarily to give them a grade, or I would say not the only reason is to give them a grade. Yes, at some point you're going to have to grade them. You're going to have to say they have progressed or they haven't progressed according to whatever scale is in your classroom. But it should also be used to modify how I teach. If I'm working with a group of students, and they're moving much more quickly than I anticipated, well, I need to modify my scale so I can move them faster. The opposite is also true. If I'm teaching something and I get these, blank stares and nobody does well on the test, well, it's probably my fault. It's probably that I need to modify my instruction so that they can get it. Again, that's the goal, language progression, right? Content and language progression. So the assessments can enable me to modify how I'm teaching so that I can better meet their needs and move them forward. You do find those rare occasions where all of your students are slackers, and so none of them learn. In that case, it wouldn't necessarily be your fault. But it also would mean that you need to find some way to encourage these people to drink the water so that they can move forward. In any event, those are some of the things that you can do with assessment and some ways to collect this information. Classroom-based assessments are things that I'll be showing to you a little bit later, but these are the assessments that you and the teacher can do to identify the strengths and weaknesses of the course and of the students. So it's an excellent tool to have. You should be doing this all the time. Me, I am constantly, if I'm teaching an ESL class, second language learners, I'm monitoring what's going on with them and with me. Again, I want to modify my teaching so that I can aid them better, and I'm monitoring them. Great thing for classroom-based assessments. Okay, it impacts instructional planning, and it is more immediate. You get these results more quickly. You can turn around your class and change things on the fly because you have this information at hand. Some people actually like doing classroom-based research. And part of this whole idea of classroom-based assessment is that you can do this for research purposes as well. Unlike the classroom-based, the high-stakes testing is not something that you, the teacher, have control over. It's a state test, or it's an organizational test that you give out to your students on a particular day. It's usually paper and pencil, and the tests are given out, and they are used to assess the program. They are used to assess the school. Okay, so the test is given out, and the students have to take the test. But if the scores come back bad, the school can be punished. If the scores come back good, the school can be benefited. That's why several years ago there were certain schools in some school districts or in some states in the United States, and they found out that the teachers were helping the students cheat. And why were they helping them cheat? Well, the actual test did not benefit the student. It benefited the state. And not that there's anything wrong with assessing your program. You ought to. The state ought to. But these tests are primarily designed not to test the student's abilities and not to help the student get better. Okay? These tests are oftentimes where you're testing students against all the test takers. That's what the TOEFL test is about. That's what the SAT and the GRE and all those types of tests. You're testing, you're trying to get a percentile, an average, based on everybody who's taking the test. Classroom-based test is that you're trying to identify students against abilities, against the curriculum. And then there's an added burden for second language learners who are taking these state tests. They have to take these state tests, and they have a language lag. So they're being tested both on content and on their language ability, which is, in my opinion, a little unfair. They should be given... anyway, that's the difference. I'm not going to go into any more of the politics with that. You can see the difference between classroom-based tests, which can help almost immediately, and then the high-stake tests, which sometimes students don't even get the results back other than a number. So it doesn't help them improve. Okay. Classroom-based assessments for second language learners. Some of the reasons to have these types of assessments is to identify the students' literacy strengths and weaknesses. Their strengths and weaknesses regarding strategies, regarding vocabulary strength, understanding, reading skills, reading strategies, their writing skills as well. It should impact the literacy planning, as I've mentioned before. It also aids in monitoring student progress, as I've mentioned before. So it's a good thing to have. You can monitor how your students are doing, and again, you can modify your program as needed. It also aids in identifying cultural hurdles. And normally when you're looking at literacy, you don't focus on cultural hurdles, but they can definitely slow down or screw up the way people your students learn and progress in their classrooms, because they have these cultural hurdles, things that they assume mean certain things and they don't necessarily. You can look at eye contact, just a perfect example. There are some students, they walk into your classroom and they think that eye contact is too intimate, it's too personal. It's the way they grew up. I remember having a student in one of my classes and her hair was right here, so I couldn't see her face. She deliberately put her head down like this so that I couldn't see her eyes. That was the culture that she came from. Well, that's something that you're going to have to deal with, and also try to teach them that there's a difference here in the culture in the United States anyway, or whatever culture that you're in. So that could be a possible hurdle. Group response. How do you interact within a group? There are some cultures where they don't want to interact. They don't want to appear to be aggressive within the group. They do that differently in different ways, and so that's another possible hurdle when you're trying to deal with gaining assessment information. Volunteering, another great possible problem, in that some students don't want to volunteer. So, when I was living in Japan, I learned very quickly, you don't ask for volunteers in a classroom, especially for high school or adults, because they're not going to give responses many times. So I just started pointing at people. Again, they had to learn my culture because they were learning English. Obviously, if I'm in their class and I'm learning Japanese, well, that's different. But that's a hurdle that they're going to have to go after. Guessing. They're going to try and guess, so it's going to be different in different cultures. In some cultures, you don't make mistakes. You know the right answer, you don't say anything. So guessing is not trying to think and hey, this is a possible answer, and then say it. In some cultures, that's not going to be good. Wait time. U.S. culture is very much, I don't like waiting. You give an answer, you say you don't know. You don't sit there and ponder for a while in the middle of a class. Well, there are some cultures where that's absolutely appropriate. So that's going to be another possible hurdle. And then again, the Q&A format, where a teacher will say, okay, who's got questions? Or the teacher will start asking them questions. That type of format is not always known or understood or used in another culture. So students who are coming from these different cultures and coming here, and they are exposed to a Q&A, that's going to be different for them. They're going to have to try to understand that. You as a teacher, if you know these hurdles, you can explain them as you go along. That's going to be a plus for them, so that they're going to learn this new system and then more quickly be able to progress in their literacy knowledge and strength. So some of these hurdles can slow down the literacy learning process, and you as a teacher should know what they are, so that, obviously you're assessing these, right? You're assessing that they need help with these, and then help them master these so that they can move on with the more traditional assessment items. All right, some assessment tools that Cloud, Genesee, and HAmayan talk about. One is keeping a record of your ELLs. Now, if you're a grammar school teacher, an elementary school teacher, oftentimes you already do this. You get up to higher levels, fewer and fewer people do this. But this is a really good idea to keep a record of all of your students, and you can note the things that they know, the things that they don't know, the things that they've mastered. You can also share these records with your students to help motivate them. You don't have to, but sometimes if you try to share ownership of the language learning, they're very motivated. Now that they know what they need to do and how they need to progress, they can be more motivated to learn. Okay, it doesn't have to be done that way, but keeping a record certainly is a good thing for you and your students to understand and identify individual weaknesses throughout their learning process. You can record their paper-based activities as well as any observations that you notice as far as their language learning. You can have your students keep a learning log, and they write down on their learning log what they've learned today, what they've processed, frustrations they may have, other things like that. And so you can help students with their writing skills. They can identify their grammar ability, their vocabulary usage. You can also use it for students to talk about what they're interested in, what they're frustrated with. Of course, you go and you read these, and you can see what it is that they're doing and learning and how they're growing. There are some teachers who don't read them. They give them to their students, and it's kind of like a personal diary. They're not necessarily graded on, but they could be. That's going to be up to between you and the student. You can keep an observation log. This is another log that you can keep, as I was mentioning earlier. You're walking around, you're noticing things, you're checking off how these students are learning or progressing. You can monitor language, you can monitor usage, you can monitor culture, monitor pronunciation. And again, you can record classroom observations, you can record things on their paper-based items as well. An observation log. Lastly, they talk about writing conferences, and writing conferences are used everywhere in mainstream composition courses, as well as here. You can use a writing conference where you sit down with a student and you walk through their major problems within their papers. You can identify their strengths and weaknesses. You can also assess their metacognitive abilities, because you can talk to them about their writing and about their literacy abilities and what strategies that they do use and that kind of thing. Those are 4 tests or 4 tools that you can be incorporating in your classes. Now, the authors of the textbook mentioned that some of these can be used for lower level, some of these can be used for upper level. Use the ones that are beneficial to you, depending on what it is that you're teaching and what it is that you want to monitor, so that you can see your students progress forward in their literacy instruction. And that's all I have for this particular lesson. I do thank you for stopping by. If you do have any questions, you can shoot me an email or drop me a message down below. Have a nice day. Bye-bye now.